The coffee shop smelled of cinnamon and desperation. Mine, mostly. 3 job rejections in 1 week had a way of making even the most optimistic person question their life choices. I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear and adjusted my glasses, scanning the room for an empty table. The place buzzed with the typical morning crowd. Business people tapping frantically on laptops, college students highlighting textbooks, and the occasional tourist studying maps of Boston. I spotted a small table in the corner and made my way through the maze of chairs, clutching my mocha like it was the last life raft on a sinking ship. The coffee was overpriced, but I'd splurged anyway. Small comforts were all I had these days. As I settled into my seat, the bell above the door chimed. The casual hum of conversation dimmed immediately. It was subtle, like someone had turned down the volume knob on the room, but unmistakable. My eyes followed everyone else's to the entrance. A young man walked in, tall, perhaps 25, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, and striking blue eyes that contrasted with his olive skin. He wore a tailored black coat over a gray sweater, expensive but understated. Behind him, a much larger man in a dark suit entered, scanning the room with calculating eyes. The bodyguard's presence seemed to fill the space, making the coffee shop feel suddenly smaller. I watched as people averted their gazes, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The young man didn't seem to notice, or perhaps he was used to it. He moved with quiet confidence to the counter, where the barista's smile looked plastered on, her hands trembling slightly as she took his order. It wasn't hard to guess who he was. Everyone in Boston knew about the Moretti family. Their name was whispered in corners, their businesses scattered throughout the city like chess pieces on a board they controlled. Vincent Moretti had been running the family's enterprises for over 20 years. I'd seen his picture in newspapers, always accompanying articles about suspected criminal activities that somehow never resulted in convictions. This must be his son. I'd heard rumors, of course. The deaf son of the most feared man in Boston. A curiosity that people discussed in hushed tones. I watched as he pointed to something on the menu board. The barista nodded nervously, her eyes darting to the bodyguard and back. When she asked him a question, he didn't respond, and the awkwardness thickened in the air. She repeated herself louder, as if volume was the issue. The young man touched his ear and shook his head slightly. The barista's face flushed with embarrassment, as she fumbled with a notepad for him to write on. Something in me shifted. I knew that feeling of isolation, of being misunderstood, though certainly not for the same reasons. 3 years of working with deaf children at my previous school in Chicago had taught me many things. But most importantly, it had taught me that communication barriers were more about the unwillingness to find alternative paths than actual inability. Before I could question my impulse, I stood up and walked to the counter. The bodyguard's eyes locked onto me immediately, his hand shifting slightly toward his jacket. I swallowed hard but kept moving. "Excuse me," I said, then turned to the young man and signed. "Would you like some help ordering?" The surprise that flickered across his face was instant. His blue eyes widened, studying me with sudden intensity. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "You know ASL." His hands moved fluidly, with what I recognized as a slight Boston accent in his signing. "Yes," I replied. "I used to teach deaf children. I'm Emma." "Marco," he signed back, "and yes, I would appreciate the help. She doesn't understand what I want." I turned to the barista, who was watching our exchange with evident relief. "He'd like a double espresso, no sugar, and one of those chocolate croissants," I explained, signing simultaneously so Marco could follow. "Oh, thank God," she muttered. I had no idea what he was trying to order. I felt a flash of irritation. "Maybe the coffee shop could benefit from basic sign language training for staff," I suggested, keeping my voice light but pointed. The barista had the grace to look embarrassed as she rang up the order. I glanced back at Marco, who was watching me with undisguised interest. "Thank you," he signed. "Not many people in Boston know ASL." "Happy to help," I replied, suddenly aware of the bodyguard's unwavering stare. I should get back to my table. "Wait," Marco signed quickly. "Would you join me? It's rare to find someone I can actually talk to." The request caught me off guard. Warning bells rang in my head. This wasn't just any person asking to share a table. This was a Moretti. The implications made my stomach tighten. But something in his expression, a mixture of hope and resignation, as if he expected rejection, made my decision for me. "Sure," I signed. "Let me grab my things." As I turned to collect my belongings, I caught sight of several patrons watching our interaction with poorly concealed curiosity. Some quickly looked away when they noticed my gaze. Others whispered behind cupped hands. I straightened my shoulders and walked back to Marco, who was now receiving his order. We settled at a table by the window, the morning light casting patterns across the wooden surface. The bodyguard positioned himself at a nearby table, close enough to intervene if necessary, but giving us a semblance of privacy. "So, Emma," Marco signed after taking a sip of his espresso. "What brings you to Lucia's at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday looking like the world is ending?" I laughed, surprised by his directness. "Is it that obvious?" He shrugged, his eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. "I'm good at reading people. Even without hearing, I notice things others don't. Job hunting," I admitted. "I moved to Boston 3 weeks ago for a teaching position, but the school lost its funding for the special education program. Now I'm scrambling for alternatives." "What do you teach?" "I specialize in education for deaf and hard-of-hearing children. I worked at a school in Chicago for 3 years. Interest sparked in his eyes. "Why Boston?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share with this stranger. But there was something disarming about him that made the truth slip out easily. "My mother got sick. Cancer. She's in treatment here, and I wanted to be close to her." I left out the part about the bitter divorce that had left her alone, about the mounting medical bills, about the nights I spent worrying if I'd made a massive mistake moving here. Marco nodded, his expression softening. "I'm sorry. Family is everything." The way he said it, with such conviction, reminded me who I was talking to the Morettis. Family truly was everything, from what the newspapers reported. Their loyalty to each other was legendary, as was their vengeance against those who betrayed them. "What about you?" I asked, eager to shift the conversation. "What do you do?" A shadow crossed his face. "I work for my father." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. The implications hung between us like an invisible curtain. "How did you become fluent in ASL?" he asked instead. "My cousin was born deaf. We grew up together, and I learned alongside her. It felt natural to pursue it professionally." I took a sip of my cooling mocha. "When did you lose your hearing?" "I was born with partial hearing," he explained, his signs measured and precise. "A fever when I was 4 took the rest. My father hired the best teachers, but..." He glanced around the coffee shop. "Most people don't bother to learn how to communicate with me. They talk to Anthony instead." He nodded toward the bodyguard. The sadness underlying his matter-of-fact statement tugged at something in my chest. I recognized the isolation he described, though I imagined it was compounded by who his family was. People already feared the Morettis. The communication barrier gave them another reason to keep their distance. "Their loss," I signed, then immediately felt foolish for the platitude, but Marco smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face, making him look younger and more approachable. "You're different." The intensity of his gaze made heat rise to my cheeks. I looked down at my coffee, suddenly aware of the dangerous territory I was entering. This casual conversation felt significant in ways I couldn't quite articulate. The bodyguard, Anthony, shifted in his seat, checking his watch. He made a subtle gesture to Marco, who nodded. "I have to go," Marco signed, disappointment evident in his expression. "Business meetings, the bane of my existence." I nodded, ignoring the strange twinge of regret I felt. This was for the best. One pleasant conversation with Marco Moretti was already one more than was prudent. He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek business card holder. He withdrew a card and placed it on the table between us. "If you're looking for a job, my family's foundation runs a school for deaf children in the North End. They're always looking for qualified teachers." His fingers lingered on the card. No pressure. Just an option. I stared at the card. Moretti Family Foundation was embossed in elegant script, with an address and phone number beneath. My throat tightened. A job. Exactly what I needed. But working for the Morettis, thank you. I signed, taking the card carefully. "I'll think about it." Marco stood, buttoning his coat. Anthony was already at attention, scanning the room with practiced vigilance. "It was nice meeting you, Emma," Marco signed. "Maybe I'll see you again." "Maybe," I replied, knowing I should hope otherwise. As they left, conversation in the coffee shop gradually returned to its normal volume. I sat alone, turning the business card over in my fingers, feeling the weight of it beyond its physical presence. A simple piece of paper that represented a choice, one that could change everything. I slipped the card into my wallet, telling myself I was just keeping my options open. But as I gathered my things to leave, I couldn't shake the memory of Marco's smile, or the connection that had sparked between us in those brief moments. A connection built on something as simple as being seen and heard, in a world that often overlooked us both for different reasons. Outside, the autumn air was crisp against my skin. Fallen leaves crunched beneath my boots as I walked toward the subway station. Boston was still unfamiliar territory, a maze of historic streets and modern buildings that I hadn't quite figured out how to navigate. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice the black SUV idling at the curb until I was almost past it. The window rolled down smoothly, revealing Marco's face. He motioned for me to wait. My feet froze to the sidewalk as Anthony emerged from the driver's side and opened the back door. Marco stepped out, his movements graceful despite the suddenness of his appearance. "Sorry," he signed. "I forgot to ask something important." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What's that?" "Your phone number," he signed, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "In case you have questions about the school." "Oh," I said aloud, forgetting to sign in my surprise. I quickly corrected myself, of course, for professional reasons. His smile widened, telling me he saw right through my pretense. Nevertheless, he pulled out his phone and handed it to me. I typed my number with trembling fingers, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. When I handed the phone back, our fingers brushed. The brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through me, and I quickly withdrew my hand. "Thank you, Emma," he signed. "I'll be in touch." As the SUV pulled away, I stood rooted to the spot, watching until it disappeared around a corner. Only then did I release the breath I'd been holding. I had just given my phone number to the son of Boston's most notorious crime boss. And worse, much worse. I was looking forward to hearing from him. What had I gotten myself into? That night, I lay awake in my tiny apartment, staring at water stains on the ceiling while my mind replayed the morning's encounter. The business card sat on my nightstand, its presence almost accusatory in the dim glow of streetlights filtering through thin curtains. I'd checked out the Moretti Family Foundation online. It was legitimate. A well-funded school for deaf children, praised for its innovative programs and impressive results. The kind of place I'd dreamed of teaching at. But the source of that funding, I turned over, burying my face in my pillow. Working there would mean being connected to the Moretti family, to Marco. The thought brought both thrill and dread in equal measure. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, making me jump. An unknown number. My pulse quickened as I opened the message. "It's Marco. Did you consider the school?" "No pressure, just curious." I sat up, clutching the phone. How did a simple text feel so weighted? I typed and deleted several responses before settling on. "Still thinking about it. It looks impressive." The reply came quickly. "Come see it tomorrow. I can show you around. 10 a.m. My finger hovered over the screen. The practical part of me knew I needed a job. My savings were dwindling fast, and my mother's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves. The cautious part reminded me who the Morettis were, what they were capable of. But another part? A part I was trying desperately to ignore. Remembered the way Marco's eyes had lit up when I signed to him, how genuine he'd seemed. "Okay," I typed back. "Text me the address." Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. The following morning, I dressed with particular care, professional, but not stuffy. Dark jeans, a cream blouse, and a navy blazer. My hair twisted into a neat bun. I wanted to look like someone who belonged at a prestigious school, not someone desperate for employment. The Moretti Family School for the Deaf was housed in a beautifully renovated historic building in Boston's North End. Red brick and large windows, with a small courtyard where children played during what appeared to be a morning break. It looked nothing like what I'd imagined a mob-funded institution would be. It looked perfect. As I approached the wrought iron gates, I spotted Marco waiting at the entrance. He wore a light gray suit that accentuated his lean frame, his dark hair styled away from his face. He noticed me immediately, his expression brightening. Behind him stood Anthony, as ever. His watchful presence a stark reminder of who Marco was. "You came?" Marco signed when I reached him, a hint of surprise in his movements. "I said I would," I replied, trying to keep my signs casual despite my nerves. "Many people say things they don't mean," he signed, and there was a flash of something vulnerable in his eyes before his expression returned to polite interest. "Ready for the tour?" I nodded, and he led me through the gates. Children ranging from preschool to early teens moved around the grounds, some signing animatedly, others using a mix of sign and speech. They glanced curiously at me, but seemed completely comfortable with Marco's presence. A few even waved enthusiastically at him, and he returned their greetings with obvious affection. "They know you well," I observed. "I visit often," he signed. "It's important to me." We entered the building, where the halls were lined with colorful artwork. Marco guided me through classrooms equipped with the latest technology, a library with an extensive collection of resources for deaf education and specialized rooms for speech therapy and auditory training. Everything was state-of-the-art, better than any school I'd ever worked in. In one classroom, a teacher was instructing teenage students in advanced mathematics. When she spotted Marco, she smiled broadly and signed a greeting. Marco introduced me, explaining that I was considering joining the staff. "We desperately need someone for the elementary group," she signed. Our last teacher left for family reasons. "What age group?" I asked, professional interest overtaking my reservations. 7 to 9-year-olds, she replied. "Bright kids, but they need someone who really understands deaf education." "Are you certified?" "Yes, with a specialization in literacy development for deaf children," I signed, unable to keep the pride from my movements. Her eyes lit up. "Perfect. When can you start?" Marco laughed silently, his shoulders shaking. "Let her see the rest of the school first, Diane." As we continued the tour, I found myself increasingly impressed and confused. Everything about the school was legitimate, focused genuinely on providing quality education. The teachers were passionate, the facilities exceptional. It was difficult to reconcile with what I knew about the family behind it. We ended in a small garden at the back of the building, a peaceful space with benches and flowering plants. Anthony positioned himself near the door, giving us the illusion of privacy. "What do you think?" Marco asked, studying my face. "It's amazing," I admitted. "Better than anywhere I've taught before." He smiled, satisfaction evident in his expression. "The position is yours if you want it." I hesitated, the question burning inside me until I couldn't contain it any longer. "Why does your family run this school?" His expression sobered. "My father started it after I lost my hearing. He wanted a place where deaf children could get the education they deserved without the barriers I faced." His hands moved with careful precision. "Not everything my family does is what you read in newspapers." I knew I should leave it there, accept the explanation and make my decision. But something pushed me further. "But the money that funds it," Marco's jaw tightened, a flash of hardness crossing his features, "comes from various Moretti businesses, all legitimate on paper." He studied me. "Does that bother you?" "It should. It absolutely should." Yet standing there, seeing what that money had created, a haven for children who might otherwise be overlooked, made everything less clear-cut. "I need to think about it," I signed honestly. He nodded, respecting my hesitation. "Of course. The school director's number is on the card I gave you. Call her when you decide." We walked back toward the entrance in silence. Children were returning to their classrooms, their animated signing creating a visual symphony around us. One little girl with pigtails ran up to Marco, tugging on his suit jacket. He crouched down immediately, his face softening as he signed with her. Their interaction was so natural, so genuine, that it made my chest ache. At the gate, Marco turned to me. "Whatever you decide about the job, would you have dinner with me tonight?" The invitation caught me off guard. "Dinner?" "Just dinner," he clarified. "I enjoy talking with you." His signs carried a sincerity that was difficult to doubt. Every rational thought in my head screamed caution. Getting involved with Marco Moretti on any level beyond professional was dangerous territory. Yet I found myself nodding. "Just dinner," I agreed. His smile was worth the risk, or at least that's what I told myself. "I'll pick you up at 7. It wasn't until I was halfway home that I realized I never gave him my address. But of course, the son of Vincent Moretti wouldn't need to ask for such information. The thought should have terrified me more than it did. My mother called as I was getting ready that evening, her voice weaker than it had been the previous week. The treatments were taking their toll. I didn't mention Marco or the school, focusing instead on assuring her I was settling in well and had promising job prospects. Her concern for me, even through her own suffering, made guilt twist in my stomach. What would she think of me having dinner with a Moretti? At precisely 7, my buzzer rang. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my simple black dress, and pressed the intercom. "It's Marco," came Anthony's voice. I buzzed them in, heart racing. When I opened my apartment door, Marco stood there in a tailored navy suit, his presence somehow filling my shabby hallway with unexpected elegance. He took me in with an appreciative gaze that made heat rise to my cheeks. "You look beautiful," he signed. "Thank you," I replied, suddenly self-conscious of my modest dress and the small apartment visible behind me. "You look nice too." His smile was warm as he offered his arm. I took it, hyper-aware of the firm muscle beneath the expensive fabric, and of Anthony following 2 steps behind as we descended to the street. A sleek black car waited at the curb. Anthony opened the door, and Marco gestured for me to enter first. The interior was luxurious, soft leather seats and the subtle scent of cedar. "Where are we going?" I asked as Marco settled beside me. "A place where we can talk comfortably," he signed. "Do you trust me?" The question hung between us, weighted with implications beyond our dinner destination. I should have said no. Should have acknowledged that trusting a Moretti after knowing him for just over a day was the height of foolishness. Instead, I found myself nodding. The restaurant wasn't what I expected. Not some flashy, high-end establishment where Marco's family name would command immediate attention. Instead, it was a small, elegant place tucked away on a quiet street, with warm lighting and walls lined with books. The maitre d' greeted Marco with familiar respect, leading us to a private table in a corner partially screened by bookshelves. What surprised me most was when the man signed a greeting to Marco, his movements fluid and natural. "We're regulars," Marco explained, noting my expression. "The owner's daughter is deaf. He made sure all his staff learned ASL." Once seated with Anthony at a discreet distance, Marco handed me a menu. "Order anything you want. Their seafood is excellent." The prices made me wince internally, but I chose a simple pasta dish while Marco selected something in rapid signing with the waiter. Wine appeared, deep red, and undoubtedly expensive. "So," Marco signed after we'd been served, "tell me more about Emma Watson, the woman brave enough to approach a Moretti in a coffee shop." I laughed despite myself. Not brave. Just saw someone who needed help communicating. "Most people would have stayed in their seats," he countered. "What brought you from Chicago to Boston, really? Beyond your mother's illness." His perceptiveness was unsettling. I took a sip of wine, considering how much to share. I needed a fresh start, I admitted. "My fiancé and I broke up 6 months ago. Then my mother got sick. It seemed like the right time to make a change." "I'm sorry about your mother," he signed, his expression genuinely sympathetic. "And the fiancé, his loss." The compliment made me flush. "What about you?" I deflected. "Have you always worked for your father?" A shadow crossed his face. "Since I was 18. It's expected." His signs became more measured, controlled. "My father believes family business stays in the family. Is that what you want?" I asked, bold from the wine and the intimate setting. Marco's eyes met mine, intense and unreadable. What I want has rarely been relevant. The answer sent a chill through me, a reminder of the world he inhabited. Before I could respond, he continued. "But the school is mine, my project. The one thing my father gave me complete control over. Suddenly, his investment in it made sense, why he visited often, why he personally showed me around. It wasn't just family obligation. It was his passion." "It shows," I signed. "The school is amazing." His expression lightened. "So you'll take the job?" I hesitated, twirling pasta around my fork. "If I do, it would be for the children, for the work. Not because of me?" He finished when my signs faltered. I nodded, feeling heat rise to my cheeks again. "Understood," he signed, but there was a hint of amusement in his expression. "Though I won't pretend I wouldn't enjoy seeing you there." The rest of dinner passed in surprisingly comfortable conversation. Marco was well-read, with opinions on everything from politics to film. He asked thoughtful questions about deaf education and listened intently to my answers. By dessert, I'd almost forgotten who he was, almost. Reality crashed back when a man approached our table, his manner deferential but urgent. He bent to whisper something to Anthony, who immediately came to Marco's side. The bodyguard signed discreetly, his movements shielded from my view. Marco's expression hardened, the warmth I'd grown accustomed to throughout dinner replaced by something cold and distant. He nodded once, then turned back to me. "I'm sorry," he signed. There's a situation I need to handle. Anthony will take you home. The abrupt shift left me reeling. Is everything okay? Family business, he signed tersely. Then, seeing my expression, he softened slightly. Nothing for you to worry about. I had a wonderful evening, Emma. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. The transformation was complete. Gone was the engaging dinner companion, replaced by someone who wore authority like a second skin. This was Marco Moretti, son of Boston's crime lord. The reminder was jarring. Think about the job, he signed before leaving. The children need someone like you. I watched him walk away, straight-backed and purposeful. Anthony remained, gesturing toward the exit with a respectful nod. The bill, I noticed, had already been settled. The car ride back to my apartment was silent. When we arrived, Anthony walked me to my door. A courtesy or surveillance, I wasn't sure which. Mr. Moretti enjoyed your company, he said, his first words to me directly. That's rare. Before I could respond, he handed me a small box. He asked me to give you this. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a small hand in the ASL sign for friend. The gesture was both thoughtful and presumptuous, just like its giver. That night, I made my decision. I called the school director the next morning and accepted the position, telling myself it was for the opportunity, for the children who needed me, not for the man whose blue eyes and fluid signs had somehow slipped past my defenses in less than 48 hours. I started the following Monday, determined to keep things professional. But as I arranged my new classroom, I couldn't help wondering when I would see Marco again and what complications would follow when I did. 3 weeks into my new job, I'd fallen in love with the school. My students were bright, eager, and responded well to my teaching methods. The facilities were everything I could have dreamed of, and my colleagues welcomed me warmly. If I occasionally glanced at the entrance, hoping for a glimpse of dark hair and blue eyes, I refused to acknowledge it, even to myself. Marco hadn't returned to the school since our dinner. No calls, no texts. The silver bracelet remained in its box, untouched. I told myself it was for the best, that the connection I'd felt had been magnified by the novelty of meeting someone who could sign, by the excitement of a new city and a fresh start. Yet disappointment lingered. Emma? Diane caught my attention as I was gathering my things after the school day ended. There's a staff meeting in 10 minutes. Didn't you see the email? I shook my head, following her to the conference room. Most of the teachers were already seated, an air of anticipation palpable in the room. I slid into an empty chair, raising my eyebrows questioningly at Diane. Quarterly budget review, she signed discreetly. The Moretti Foundation representatives attend. My heart skipped. Representatives? Before she could answer, the door opened. Marco entered, followed by an older man I didn't recognize, and of course, Anthony. Marco wore a charcoal suit, his expression serious as he surveyed the room. When his eyes found mine, something flickered across his features. Surprise, then pleasure, quickly masked by professional detachment. The school director, Patricia, began the meeting, reviewing the past quarter's achievements and challenges. I tried to focus, but my awareness of Marco's presence made it difficult. He sat at the head of the table, occasionally signing questions or comments, his movements precise and authoritative. This was a different Marco than the one who had dined with me. This was the businessman, the Moretti heir. The juxtaposition was jarring. When the meeting concluded, teachers began filtering out. I gathered my notes, planning a quick escape, but Marco intercepted me at the door. I didn't know you'd taken the job, he signed, his expression guarded. I started 3 weeks ago, I replied, keeping my signs professional despite the flutter in my chest. Your father's representatives hired me. I've been away on business. A pause, his eyes searching mine. I would have welcomed you personally otherwise. The older man approached, eyeing me with interest. Marco straightened slightly. Father, this is Emma Watson, our new elementary educator, he said aloud, his voice startling me. I'd never heard him speak before. His speech was slightly impaired but understandable, the words carefully formed. Emma, my father, Vincent Moretti. I froze. Vincent Moretti stood before me, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His hair was silver at the temples, his face lined but handsome, with the same striking blue eyes as his son. Power emanated from him like heat from a flame. Miss Watson, he said, extending his hand. Marco tells me you're quite talented with our children. I shook his hand, acutely aware of its firmness. I'm still getting to know them, but they're wonderful students. My son has excellent judgment about people, Vincent continued, his gaze assessing. A valuable quality in our line of work. Marco shifted slightly, signing something to his father that I couldn't quite catch. Vincent's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. We're having a family dinner this Sunday, Vincent said, returning his attention to me. Marco would like you to attend. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. I glanced at Marco, whose expression remained carefully neutral. Thank you, but I usually visit my mother on Sundays, I stammered. Bring her, Vincent replied smoothly. I understand she's receiving treatment at Boston Medical. Our family has connections there. Perhaps we could be of assistance. The casual mention of my mother's condition, information I hadn't shared with Marco, sent a chill through me. Of course they'd investigated me. I was a stranger who had approached the heir to their empire. That's very kind. But she's not well enough for social gatherings, I said, striving to keep my voice steady. Vincent studied me for a moment, then inclined his head slightly. Another time, then. Marco will arrange it. He turned to his son. The car is waiting. After Vincent departed, Marco lingered, Anthony maintaining a discreet distance. I'm sorry about that, Marco signed, his movements conveying frustration. My father can be insistent. He investigated me. I signed back, unable to hide my discomfort. Marco's expression turned apologetic. Standard procedure for anyone who works closely with family. I should have warned you. Is that what I'm doing? Working closely with family? The question carried more weight than I intended. His eyes held mine. I'd like you to be. The directness of his response caught me off guard. Before I could formulate a reply, he continued. Have dinner with me tomorrow. Just us. He paused. Please. I should have declined. Should have established firm boundaries. Instead, I found myself nodding. Good, he signed, relief evident in his expression. I'll pick you up at 7. As I watched him leave, Diane appeared at my side, her eyes wide. Vincent Moretti knows who you are. She signed rapidly. Do you realize how unusual that is? I did, and that knowledge sat uneasily in my stomach long after I returned home. The next evening, Marco arrived alone. No Anthony, no black car with tinted windows. Instead, he drove himself in a sleek Audi, dressed casually in dark jeans and a gray sweater that made his eyes appear even bluer. The transformation from businessman to just Marco was disarming. No bodyguard tonight? I signed as we walked to his car. I negotiated a night off, he replied with a wry smile. It wasn't easy. He drove us to a small Italian restaurant on the waterfront, far from the tourist areas. The owner greeted him warmly, leading us to a table on a private terrace overlooking the harbor. Marco ordered in fluid Italian, his hands occasionally moving in gesture as he spoke. This place reminds me of home, he signed when the owner left. My grandmother's cooking. You speak Italian too, I observed. And English. That's impressive for someone who lost their hearing young. My father insisted, he explained. Reading lips, speech therapy, multiple languages. He was determined my deafness wouldn't limit me. There was a complex mixture of emotions in his expression. Gratitude, resentment, pride. Was it difficult? Growing up as Vincent Moretti's son? Marco considered the question, his fingers absently tracing the stem of his wineglass. Being a Moretti comes with expectations. Being the deaf son of Vincent Moretti, that came with something to prove. And have you? Proven yourself? I asked, genuinely curious. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Every day, the food arrived. Authentic Italian dishes that tasted like they'd come from a grandmother's kitchen rather than a restaurant. As we ate, Marco gradually relaxed, the weight of his family name seeming to lift slightly from his shoulders. Tell me about your mother, he signed between courses. I hesitated, then decided honesty was best. She has lymphoma. The prognosis is uncertain. I swallowed hard. The treatments are expensive, even with insurance. Marco nodded, his expression softening. That's why you needed the job so badly. One of the reasons, I admitted. He was quiet for a moment, seeming to debate something internally. Let me help. I stiffened immediately. I don't want charity. Not charity, he clarified quickly. We have connections at the hospital. Better doctors, experimental treatments, no strings attached. There are always strings. I signed, my movements sharp with sudden anger, especially with your family. As soon as the words left my hands, I regretted them. Marco's expression closed off, the openness of moments before replaced by careful control. I'm not offering Moretti money, he signed after a tense pause. I'm offering access to resources that could help your mother. But if you'd rather maintain your moral high ground than accept help that could save her life, that's your choice. Shame washed over me, followed by confusion. Was I being proud or prudent? Where was the line between accepting help and becoming indebted to a family like the Morettis? I'm sorry, I signed eventually. It's complicated. His expression softened. Life usually is. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine briefly. Think about it. The offer stands, no matter what. No matter what. The phrase lingered in my mind. No matter what happened between us. No matter if I reciprocated the interest I saw in his eyes. The rest of dinner passed in lighter conversation. Marco told stories about the school's founding, about his travels, about books he'd read recently. I found myself laughing, relaxing into his company despite all my reservations. When he suggested a walk along the harbor afterward, I agreed readily. The night was cool, stars visible despite the city lights. We strolled in comfortable silence, our hands occasionally brushing. The contact sent small shocks through me each time. Eventually, we stopped at a secluded viewpoint, the city's skyline glittering across the water. I've missed talking with you, Marco signed, turning to face me. These past weeks, I wanted to see you, but there were complications. What kind of complications? I asked, aware of how close we were standing, of the intensity in his gaze. Family business, he replied. The standard answer, then surprising me. A territorial dispute that needed resolution. My father sent me to New York to handle it. The casual reference to what was almost certainly illegal activity should have repulsed me. Instead, I found myself appreciating his honesty, however limited. Why me, Marco? I signed, the question that had been burning inside me since our first meeting. Why are you pursuing this, whatever this is? His expression turned serious, contemplative. When you first signed to me in that coffee shop, you saw me. Not the Moretti heir, not the deaf man everyone avoids, just me. He paused. Do you know how rare that is in my world? The raw honesty in his eyes made my chest tighten. I understood isolation, had felt it acutely since moving to Boston. But Marco's isolation was different, built of fear, deference, and communication barriers all at once. Before I could respond, he stepped closer, one hand gently cupping my cheek. His eyes asked a question, and despite every rational thought screaming caution, I nodded slightly. His lips met mine, soft and tentative at first. Then with growing intensity as I responded, his arms encircled me, strong and secure, and I felt myself melting into him, all reservations temporarily forgotten. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Marco's eyes were dark with emotion. I've wanted to do that since I saw you in that coffee shop, he signed. I laughed softly. That would have been forward, even for a Moretti. His answering smile was everything I'd been trying not to want. We walked back to his car hand in hand, the night air cool against my flushed skin. The drive to my apartment was charged with unspoken tension, his hand occasionally finding mine across the console. At my door, he kissed me again, deeper and more urgent. It would have been so easy to invite him in, to let whatever was building between us continue its natural progression. Instead, I pulled back slightly. This is complicated, I signed, my hands unsteady. Yes, he agreed, not pretending to misunderstand. But worth exploring, I think. As I watched him drive away, I touched my lips, still tingling from his kiss. I was falling for Marco Moretti, a man whose world was so far removed from mine that it might as well have been another planet. A man whose family business operated outside the law. A man who, despite everything, made me feel seen in a way no one else ever had. The next day at school, I threw myself into teaching, trying to focus on the children, rather than thoughts of Marco. I was helping a student with a reading exercise when Patricia appeared at my classroom door. Emma, can I see you in my office? She asked, her expression unreadable. In her office, I found not only Patricia, but also a man in a suit I didn't recognize. His posture and the way his eyes scanned the room reminded me of Anthony. Emma, this is Mr. Russo, Patricia said, her usual warmth notably absent. He has some questions for you. Mr. Russo smiled thinly. Miss Watson, I work for the Moretti family, specifically for Mr. Vincent Moretti. My stomach dropped. What is this about? Mr. Moretti is concerned about your growing closeness with his son, Russo said, the euphemism hanging delicately in the air. He wishes to understand your intentions. Anger flashed through me. My intentions? I'm a teacher at this school. My primary intention is to educate my students. And your relationship with Marco Moretti? That's personal, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Russo's expression remained impassive. Nothing involving the Moretti family is purely personal, Miss Watson. Surely you understand that. The implied threat chilled me. Patricia looked uncomfortable but remained silent. What exactly does Mr. Moretti want from me? I asked finally. Clarity, Russo replied. Are you with his son because of who he is? Because of what he can provide? Or perhaps because someone else is paying you to get close to him? The accusation hit like a physical blow. That's absurd. Is it? A teacher from Chicago suddenly appears, approaches the Moretti heir, gains employment at his school, and becomes intimately involved with him in a matter of weeks. Russo shrugged. You must admit, it raises questions. Before I could respond, the door opened. Marco stood there, his expression thunderous. Behind him, Anthony looked apologetic. What is this? Marco demanded, his voice rough with anger. He signed simultaneously, movements sharp and aggressive. Russo straightened. Mr. Moretti, I was just having a conversation with Miss Watson about... I know what you were doing, Marco interrupted. My father's orders, I assume? He's concerned, Russo replied carefully. Marco's laugh was harsh, without humor. Leave, now. The command was unmistakable. Russo hesitated only briefly before nodding and exiting, closing the door behind him. Marco turned to Patricia. Give us a moment, he signed. She complied quickly, leaving us alone. I'm sorry. Marco signed once we were alone, his anger giving way to regret. My father. He's protective, suspicious. He thinks I'm what? A spy? A gold digger? My signs were jerky with indignation. He doesn't trust easily, Marco replied, especially when it comes to me. So he sends someone to interrogate me at my workplace? I couldn't keep the hurt from my expression. Is this what being involved with you means? Constant surveillance, questioning, suspicion? Marco's face fell. I never wanted this for you. He moved closer, his signs gentler. I'll speak to my father. Make him understand. But I was already shaking my head. This is your world, isn't it? Not just fancy dinners and private school funding. Intimidation, control, fear. Emma, please. His eyes were pained. What happened today? It's not all of who we are, not who I am. I wanted to believe him. Part of me did. But standing in that office, having just been interrogated like a criminal, reality came crashing down. Whatever was growing between us existed in a bubble, one that had just burst violently. I need time to think, I signed. This is too much, too fast. Marco nodded slowly, resignation settling over his features. I understand. He reached for my hand, and I let him take it. But don't let my father's paranoia make your decision for you. After he left, I sank into a chair, my emotions in turmoil. I cared for Marco, more than I should after such a short time. But was I prepared for what being with him would mean? The scrutiny, the danger, the moral compromises? And what about my students? I love teaching at the school, making a difference in their lives. Could I walk away from that? Should I? As I returned to my classroom, these questions swirled in my mind without clear answers. One thing was certain. My simple fresh start in Boston had become anything but simple. That evening, a package arrived at my apartment. A sleek laptop with a note, for your mother to video call you during treatments. No strings. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. The gesture was classic Marco, thoughtful, addressing a need I'd mentioned only in passing, while respecting my boundaries by not attempting to pay for the medical treatments directly. I ran my fingers over the smooth surface, torn between gratitude and unease. The line between kindness and manipulation blurred when it came from a Moretti. Yet something told me Marco's intentions were genuine, whatever his father's might be. I slept fitfully that night, dreams filled with shadowy figures and blue eyes that watched me from a distance. For a week, I maintained my distance from Marco. I taught my classes, visited my mother, and tried to sort through my conflicted feelings. The laptop proved invaluable. My mother's face lighting up on the screen during her long treatment sessions brought a joy I couldn't regret, whatever its source. Marco respected my request for space, though Anthony's occasional presence near the school reminded me I was still being watched. The realization should have angered me more than it did. Instead, it felt almost like protection, misguided, but well-intentioned. On Friday afternoon, as I was preparing to leave school, Patricia called me into her office. Her expression was grave as she gestured for me to sit. "Emma, I've received some concerning information," she began. "Your background check shows inconsistencies." I stiffened. "What inconsistencies?" She slid a folder across her desk. Inside was a detailed report of my employment history, including a 6-month gap I'd claimed was spent substitute teaching. "This says you were unemployed during that period," Patricia said gently. "We need complete honesty from our teachers, Emma." My throat tightened. The gap was real. Months spent caring for my cousin after a car accident, too personal to share in a job interview. But I'd fabricated the substitute work to avoid awkward questions. "I can explain," I started, but Patricia raised a hand. "I don't think you understand. This report wasn't generated by our HR department." She lowered her voice. "It came from Vincent Moretti's office." Ice formed in my stomach. "What?" "He's building a case against you," she said, her eyes sympathetic. "Looking for reasons to remove you from the school, and from his son's life. Can he do that?" I whispered. Patricia's laugh was humorless. "The Morettis own this school, Emma. They can do whatever they want." I left her office in a daze, anger and fear warring within me. Outside, rain poured from a leaden sky, matching my mood perfectly. I'd forgotten my umbrella, so I huddled under the entrance overhang, debating whether to wait or make a run for the subway. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down, revealing Marco's face. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Need a ride?" He signed through the open window. Pride told me to refuse, to maintain the distance I'd established. But the rain was coming down harder now, and the hurt and confusion of the past week had left me exhausted. I nodded, hurrying to the car. Inside, the warmth and Marco's familiar scent, sandalwood and something uniquely him, enveloped me. Anthony drove silently as we pulled away from the curb. "Your father is investigating me," I signed without preamble. "Trying to get me fired." Marco's jaw tightened. "I know. I've been fighting him on it all week. Why? What have I done to make him so suspicious?" Marco hesitated, then signed. "It's not you specifically. It's anyone who gets close to me that isn't under his control." His expression was pained. "My father believes everyone has an agenda." "And what do you believe?" I challenged. His eyes met mine, intense and unwavering. "I believe in what I see, what I feel, what I know about you." The sincerity in his gaze made my anger falter. "Your father could destroy my career, Marco." "He's already found things in my background. The gap in your employment?" At my surprised look, he continued, "I saw the report. I told him it was irrelevant. It's not irrelevant if it gets me fired." Marco's expression hardened with determination. "That won't happen. I won't let it." "How can you stop it?" I signed, frustration evident in my movements. "You said yourself, your father controls everything." "Not everything," Marco replied. "Not this. Not us." The us hung between us, a concept both terrifying and thrilling. Before I could respond, he continued. "Come to dinner tomorrow night," he signed. "My house. I want to show you something." After everything, I should have declined. Yet looking at him, the earnestness in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that spoke of battles fought on my behalf, I found myself nodding. "Just dinner," I qualified. His smile was worth the risk. Just dinner. And maybe a revelation or two. The next evening found me at an elegant brownstone in Beacon Hill, far grander than I'd imagined. Anthony admitted me with a respectful nod, leading me through a foyer adorned with tasteful artwork to a spacious living room. The decor surprised me. Warm colors, comfortable furniture, bookshelves filled with well-worn volumes. Not the cold, ostentatious display of wealth I'd expected from a Moretti. Marco emerged from what appeared to be a kitchen, dressed casually in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. Seeing him in this domestic setting, away from his father's shadow, made something shift in my perception. "Welcome to my home," he signed. His movements relaxed. "Not what you expected?" I smiled ruefully. I think I pictured something more mobster chic. Gold fixtures and security cameras. He laughed. "The security system is state-of-the-art, but hidden. As for the decor, this is my space. The one place I don't have to be a Moretti." The distinction was telling. He gave me a tour. A home office with specialized computer equipment, a small gym, a kitchen where something delicious simmered on the stove. Everything spoke of careful curation, of a sanctuary created with intention. "You cook?" I asked, as he stirred what appeared to be a rich pasta sauce. "Another skill my father insisted I master." He replied with a wry smile, "Independence above all. Can't rely on others for basic needs." We ate at a small table in a windowed alcove overlooking a private garden. The food was excellent. Homemade pasta with a sauce Marco explained had been his grandmother's recipe. Wine was poured, conversation flowed, and the tension of the past week gradually dissipated. "You said you wanted to show me something," I reminded him as we finished our meal. Marco nodded, his expression turning serious. He led me to his office, where he unlocked a drawer in his desk and withdrew a thick folder. "This is what I've been working on," he signed, handing it to me. Inside were legal documents, deeds, trust agreements, financial statements. I looked up, confused. "I don't understand." Marco sat on the edge of his desk, his signs measured and deliberate. "I've been transferring ownership of the school to an independent trust. My father will have no control over it, or over who works there." I stared at him, the implications slowly dawning. "You're doing this for me?" "Partly," he admitted. "But I've been planning it for months. The school should stand on its own, separate from my family's other interests." The distinction he drew between himself and the family business was becoming clearer. Marco might work for his father, might participate in aspects of the Moretti Empire, but he had boundaries. Lines he wouldn't cross, principles he maintained. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. His expression softened. "Because I want you to understand who I am, separate from my name. What matters to me." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "And because I'm falling in love with you, Emma. I need you to know what that means. The complications, yes, but also the possibilities." The declaration left me speechless. Love, such a small word for the emotional hurricane it represented. Was that what this overwhelming connection was? This feeling that had grown so rapidly, so unexpectedly? "Marco, My hands faltered, unsure how to respond. "You don't need to say anything," he signed quickly. "I know it's too soon, too complicated, but I wanted to be honest." The vulnerability in his eyes undid me. I stepped closer, reaching up to touch his face. He leaned into my hand, his eyes closing briefly at the contact. When they opened again, the intensity there took my breath away. I kissed him, pouring into it all the confusion and longing and fear I couldn't express with words or signs. His arms encircled me immediately, drawing me closer with a desperation that matched my own. The kiss deepened, months of tension culminating in a connection that felt both inevitable and revolutionary. When we finally broke apart, breathing heavily, Marco's eyes were dark with desire. But there was uncertainty there too, a question he wouldn't pressure me to answer. I made my decision, taking his hand and leading him from the office toward what I'd glimpsed earlier as his bedroom, his eyebrows raised slightly, seeking confirmation. "Are you sure?" He signed, his movements careful despite the obvious want in his expression. In answer, I kissed him again, softer this time but no less meaningful. Whatever came after, whatever complications we would face, this moment was ours alone. What followed was a revelation. Marco's hands, so eloquent in their signing, proved equally expressive in other ways. His attention to my reactions, the way he sought confirmation at each new step, made me feel both cherished and desired. When we finally came together, the connection transcended the physical. Communication without words or signs, understanding at its most fundamental. Afterward, lying in his arms, I traced patterns on his chest, my mind quieter than it had been in weeks. Marco watched me, his gaze soft in the dimmed light. "What are you thinking?" he signed, one-handed to avoid disturbing my position against him. "That this would terrify me if it didn't feel so right," I replied honestly. His smile was tinged with sadness. My world isn't easy to navigate, Emma. My father won't stop trying to protect what he sees as his, including me. I know. I propped myself up on one elbow to sign more clearly, but I'm not afraid of difficult things. I'm afraid of losing myself in them. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. I would never ask you to become something you're not, to compromise what matters to you. And what about you? I countered. Your father expects you to take over eventually, to become him. Marco's expression darkened. That's a battle I've been fighting my whole life. His signs became more emphatic. I work for my father. I respect him. But I'm not him, and I never will be. The conviction in his movements reassured me more than any promise could have. Whatever path Marco walked, it was his own. Influenced by his family, but not dictated by it, we spent the night together, talking into the early hours, sharing stories and dreams in the intimate darkness. I learned about his childhood struggles with deafness, his complicated relationship with his father, his hopes for the school. In turn, I told him about my cousin who had inspired my career, my mother's illness, my broken engagement to a man who'd ultimately found my dedication to deaf education limiting. Morning found us tangled together, sunlight streaming through half-drawn curtains. I watched Marco sleep, his face relaxed and younger without the weight of the Moretti name visible in his expression. For a moment, we were just two people who had found each other against the odds. No family complications, no moral quandaries. The illusion shattered with the vibration of Marco's phone on the nightstand. He stirred, reaching for it with practiced habit. Whatever he read caused him to sit up abruptly, fully awake. What's wrong? I signed, alarmed by his sudden tension. My father, he signed back, already rising from the bed. Emergency meeting at the house, I have to go. I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment as he dressed quickly. He paused, sitting on the edge of the bed to take my hand. Last night meant everything to me, he signed, his expression earnest. We'll talk more when I get back. After a lingering kiss, he was gone, leaving me alone in his house. Anthony, I presumed, had gone with him. The sudden solitude felt strange after the intimacy of the night. I showered and dressed, finding my way to the kitchen where I discovered a coffee maker and helped myself. As I sipped from a mug, wandering the living room and examining Marco's book collection, the front door opened. Expecting Marco, I turned with a smile that died instantly. Vincent Moretti stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed despite the early hour. His eyes took in my presence, wearing yesterday's clothes, clearly having spent the night, with cold calculation. "Miss Watson," he said, his tone deceptively mild. "How convenient to find you here." Fear prickled along my spine, but I lifted my chin, refusing to show it. "Mr. Moretti, Marco had to leave for a meeting with you." Yes, a situation that required his immediate attention. Vincent stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him, which gives us an opportunity to speak privately. I set down my coffee cup, my hand trembling slightly. "What do you want to talk about?" Vincent smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "My son, of course, and your rapidly developing relationship with him. With all due respect, that's between Marco and me. Nothing involving my son is that simple." Vincent replied, moving to sit in an armchair. He gestured for me to take the seat opposite. "It wasn't a request. Please, join me. This won't take long." I sat reluctantly, my back straight and tense. Vincent studied me for a moment, his gaze unsettlingly similar to Marco's but lacking the warmth. "Do you know why I created that school, Miss Watson?" The question caught me off guard. "For Marco." After he lost his hearing, Vincent nodded. "My son faced a world that would see his deafness as a weakness. I refused to allow that." His expression hardened. "Everything I've built, everything I've done, has been to protect my family, to ensure Marco would never be vulnerable." "He's not vulnerable," I countered. "He's one of the strongest people I've ever met. Yes, because I made him that way." Vincent leaned forward slightly, "But he has one persistent weakness. His heart. His desire to see the good in people." I bristled at the implication. "And you think I'm exploiting that? I think my son is infatuated with a woman who appeared suddenly in his life, who happens to speak his language, who needed a job that we conveniently provided." Vincent's voice remained calm, which somehow made it more threatening. "A woman whose background investigation reveals interesting gaps and inconsistencies." "You mean the 6 months I spent caring for my cousin after her accident?" I challenged. Is that the great secret you think gives you power over me? Surprise flickered briefly in his eyes. Marco told you about the investigation. Yes, he did, because unlike you, he trusts me. Vincent smiled thinly. Trust is a luxury in our world, Miss Watson. One we cannot always afford. It's not a luxury, I insisted. It's a foundation. Something Marco understands even if you don't. His expression hardened. Let me be direct. I've come to offer you a proposition. My stomach sank. What kind of proposition? $1 million, Vincent said simply. To leave Boston. Leave my son's life completely. No contact. No goodbyes. Just disappear. The amount shocked me. More money than I could hope to earn in decades of teaching. Money that could pay for my mother's treatments, secure her future care, solve so many problems. Vincent saw the calculation in my eyes. Think of your mother, Emma. The experimental treatments she could access. The comfort she could live in during her remaining time. The use of my first name, the intimate knowledge of my greatest vulnerability. It was manipulation at its most refined. And yet, the offer dangled before me like forbidden fruit. And if I refuse, my voice was steadier than I felt. Then you choose to remain in a world you don't understand, with dangers you can't foresee. His tone was matter of fact. My son believes he can protect you. He cannot. Not from everything. Not from everyone. The implied threat sent a chill through me. You would hurt me to hurt your son? Vincent looked genuinely offended. I would never harm a woman, but our business creates enemies, Miss Watson. Enemies who might see you as a way to reach Marco. To reach me. He paused, letting the implications sink in. The choice I'm offering isn't just about money. It's about safety. Yours and your mother's. I stood, anger overcoming fear. I think this conversation is over. Vincent remained seated, unperturbed. Consider my offer. You have until tomorrow. He withdrew a card from his pocket, placing it on the coffee table. This number will reach me directly. I don't need to tell you not to mention this to Marco. After he left, I sank back into the chair, my legs suddenly weak. $1 million. Freedom from financial worry. Safety from the shadowy world I'd glimpsed edges of. All I had to do was break Marco's heart. Break my own. I left Marco's house before he returned, sending a text saying I needed time to think. It wasn't a lie. I had too much to process, too many conflicting emotions and practical considerations swirling in my mind. At my apartment, I found a package waiting, a small, elegant box with no card. Inside was a key, unmistakably to Marco's house. The gesture of trust, coming on the heels of his father's proposition, made tears spring to my eyes. My phone rang. My mother calling from the hospital. Her face on the screen looked tired but determined. The doctors are talking about a new treatment, she said after our usual greetings. Something experimental that's showing promising results for my type of lymphoma. My heart leaped. That's wonderful, but is it covered by insurance? Her hesitation told me everything. Not exactly. It's still in trials. How much? I asked, already knowing the answer would be impossible on my teacher's salary. Don't worry about that now, she said, her smile brave. We'll figure something out. After we hung up, I sat on my bed, Vincent's card burning a hole in my pocket. $1 million. My mother's life. My future with Marco. Impossible choices colliding in a perfect storm. Sleep eluded me that night. By morning, I'd cycled through every possible scenario, every potential outcome of the choice before me. The weight of it pressed on my chest until breathing felt like an effort. I called in sick to school, unable to face my students with such turmoil in my mind. Instead, I visited my mother, watching her sleep through a chemotherapy session, her face drawn and pale against hospital sheets. The sight cemented my determination. Whatever I decided, it would be for the right reasons, not fear, not greed, not manipulation. My phone had been silent since my text to Marco. I imagined him giving me the space I'd requested, respecting my need to process our evolving relationship. The thought of his consideration only made the decision harder. By evening, I'd reached a conclusion. I pulled Vincent's card from my pocket, dialing the number with shaking fingers. Miss Watson, Vincent's voice answered on the second ring. I was expecting your call. I've made my decision, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. I'd like to meet in person. Wise choice, he replied smoothly. The Westland Hotel, penthouse suite, in 1 hour. The Westland was one of Boston's most exclusive addresses, its gleaming facade overlooking the public garden. A doorman ushered me to a private elevator that required a keycard to access the top floor. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished brass. Pale, determined, a woman at a crossroads. Vincent waited in a living room larger than my entire apartment, Boston's skyline glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. He stood as I entered, gesturing toward a chair opposite his own. A glass of amber liquid sat untouched on the table between us. "You've considered my offer," he stated rather than asked. "Yes." I met his gaze directly, and I'm declining it. Surprise flickered across his features before his expression settled into careful neutrality. "May I ask why?" "Because leaving wouldn't protect Marco. It would only hurt him." I leaned forward slightly. "And because your son deserves to make his own choices. About his life. About who he loves. Love," Vincent repeated, the word sounding foreign on his lips. "You believe you love my son after knowing him for what? A month?" "I believe we're building something real," I replied. "Something worth fighting for." Vincent studied me, reassessing. "And the money? Your mother's treatment?" The reminder stung, but I held firm. "We'll find another way." "There is no other way," he said flatly. "Not with your resources." "Then we'll manage with what we have." I stood, ready to end the conversation. "I won't be bought, Mr. Moretti. Not even for the best of reasons." As I turned to leave, Vincent's voice stopped me. "You misunderstand me, Miss Watson. I'm not trying to buy you." He paused. "I'm testing you." I turned back, confusion replacing determination. "Testing me." Vincent gestured for me to sit again. After a moment's hesitation, I complied. "My son has been surrounded by people who want something from him his entire life," Vincent explained, his tone matter of fact, his money, his name, his influence. "When he told me about you, this teacher who approached him in a coffee shop, who spoke his language, I was naturally suspicious. So you investigated me, threatened my job, offered me money to leave. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. I needed to know what kind of woman had captured my son's heart." Vincent's gaze was penetrating, whether you could be trusted with it. The revelation left me speechless. The entire scenario, from the investigation to the bribe, had been an elaborate test of character. "And if I'd taken the money?" I asked finally. "Then you would have proven me right," Vincent replied simply, "and saved my son from eventual heartbreak." Anger flared within me. "You had no right to manipulate me like that. I have every right to protect my family." Vincent's tone brooked no argument. "Marco is my only son, my legacy. His happiness is paramount to me." "And what about his agency, his right to choose his own path?" A shadow crossed Vincent's face. "Marco lives in a world of constraints, Miss Watson. Some chosen, others imposed. I cannot change that reality. But you shape it," I countered. "You determine many of those constraints." Vincent inclined his head, acknowledging the point. "Perhaps. But others exist beyond even my control." He reached for his untouched drink, taking a measured sip. "Marco tells me you make him happy. That you see him. Not the Moretti heir, not the deaf son, just him." I nodded, uncertain where the conversation was heading. "Do you understand what it means to be with him? Truly understand?" Vincent's eyes held mine, the scrutiny, the danger, the compromises. "I'm beginning to," I replied honestly. Vincent set down his glass with deliberate care. "The position at the school is yours for as long as you want it. The trust Marco is establishing will ensure that." The sudden shift caught me off guard. "What about your concerns, your suspicions?" "Still present," he admitted. "But outweighed perhaps by my son's judgment. And by your actions today." He paused. "The offer of assistance for your mother stands as well. Not as a bribe, but as a gesture of good faith." I hesitated, pride warring with practicality. "I can't accept—" "It's not charity," Vincent interrupted. "Consider it an advance on your future with this family, an investment in your mother's health that benefits us all." The careful wording, acknowledging a future with this family, while providing a way for me to accept help without feeling bought, revealed a shrewd mind accustomed to negotiation. But beneath the calculation, I sensed something else, a father's genuine concern for his son's happiness. "I'll need to discuss it with Marco," I said finally. "Any decisions about my mother's treatment should include him." Vincent nodded, apparently satisfied. Fair enough. He stood, signaling the end of our meeting. One last thing, Miss Watson. My son believes he can separate himself from what our family is, from what we do. He cannot. Not completely. That reality will touch your life too, should you choose to share his. I understand, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. But Marco is worth it. Something like approval flickered in Vincent's eyes. Then we understand each other. As I left the hotel, the night air cool against my flushed face, I felt as though I'd passed through some kind of crucible. The test hadn't ended with rejecting the money. It had extended to this final conversation, this acknowledgement of what being with Marco truly meant. My phone buzzed with an incoming text from Marco. Can I see you? I need to know you're okay. Instead of responding, I hailed a cab and gave the driver Marco's address. 20 minutes later, I stood at his door, key in hand, but hesitant to use it. I knocked instead. Marco opened the door almost immediately, relief washing over his features at the sight of me. He wore casual clothes, his hair slightly disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. I was worried. He signed. You disappeared, then called in sick to school. I needed time. I signed back. To think. To decide. His expression grew guarded. Decide what? I took a deep breath. Whether I'm brave enough for this. For us. Hope flickered in his eyes. And? I just met with your father. I signed, watching his expression shift to alarm. He offered me $1 million to leave Austin. To leave you. Marco's face darkened with anger. He had no right. I placed a hand on his chest, stopping him. Let me finish. I said no. The anger in his expression gave way to surprise, then understanding. Yes. He tested I couldn't help but smile at his quick comprehension. Apparently I passed. Marco shook his head, a mixture of frustration and resignation in his movement. My father's methods are extreme, but his intentions are usually good, in his own way. He loves you, I agreed, enough to make sure the woman in your life is worthy of you. And are you? Marco signed, his eyes intense. Worthy of what being with me means? I stepped closer, my signs deliberate and clear. I'm not afraid of your world, Marco. I'm not afraid of what loving you might cost me. The only thing I fear is not being brave enough to try. The declaration hung between us, weightier than any I love you could have been. Marco's eyes searched mine, finding whatever confirmation he needed before pulling me into his arms. His kiss was different from those we'd shared before. Not tentative exploration or passionate release, but a promise. A beginning. Later, lying in his bed with my head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath my ear, I signed against his skin. Your father offered to help with my mother's treatment. As a gesture of good faith. Marco's body tensed slightly. What did you tell him? That I needed to discuss it with you, I replied, shifting to look up at him. I won't make decisions that affect us both without you. His expression softened. Let me help her, Emma. Not because she's your mother, but because she's family now. My family takes care of its own. The words stirred something deep within me. Belonging. Security. The sense of finally finding home after years of searching. I nodded, unable to sign with the emotion tightening my throat. Marco traced my cheek gently. What are you thinking? I gathered myself, signing carefully, that I'm falling in love with you too. That whatever comes next, we'll face it together. His smile was radiant, transforming his face with joy that made my heart swell. Together, he agreed. 6 months later, my mother sat across from me in the garden of Marco's, now our home. Her color improved, her energy returning as the experimental treatment began to show results. Vincent joined us for dinner, his initial frostiness toward me having gradually thawed to something approaching respect. The school trust was finalized, ensuring its independence from Moretti family business while maintaining the financial support it needed to thrive. My world had expanded in ways I never imagined when I first approached a stranger in a coffee shop. There were still challenges. Whispers when Marco and I appeared at public functions, sideways glances from people who knew his family name, the occasional reminder of the shadier aspects of the Moretti empire that Marco was working to distance himself from. But there were joys, too, profound ones. The satisfaction of watching my students thrive. The deep connection Marco and I continued to build, bridging our different worlds with love and understanding. The sense of family that had formed around us, imperfect, but fiercely loyal. As twilight settled over the garden, Marco's hand found mine under the table, a silent communication more intimate than words or signs. His eyes asked a question I'd answered months ago and continued to answer every day. Was it worth it? This complicated life we'd built together? This love that had emerged from an unexpected moment of connection? I squeezed his hand. My answer unchanged. For him. For us. I would choose this life again and again, complexities and all. The path forward wasn't perfect or simple. The Moretti name still carried its weight of history and expectation. But Marco and I were writing our own story now, one that acknowledged the past without being defined by it, a story that had begun with a simple act of communication in a coffee shop and had grown into something neither of us could have imagined. As darkness fell and lights illuminated the garden, casting soft shadows across familiar faces, I felt the rightness of where I was, who I was with. Whatever came next, whatever challenges or joys awaited us, we would face them as we had faced everything since that first meeting, together, speaking a language all our own, finding connection in a world that had once left us both isolated in different ways. Marco caught my gaze across the table, his eyes warm with understanding. He raised his glass slightly, a private toast only I would recognize. To beginnings, to courage, to love that transcended barriers of all kinds. I raised my glass in return, my heart full with the certainty that some risks were worth taking, some connections worth fighting for. In choosing Marco, I had chosen a complicated path, but also one filled with depth, with meaning, with a love that saw beyond surface and circumstance to the person beneath. And in the end, isn't that what we all seek? To be truly seen, to be genuinely known, to find someone who speaks our language, whatever that language might be. Marco and I had found that in each other, against all odds, and it had made all the difference.